There's no point in opening box 408, Dad, my 33-year-old daughter, Evelyn, said, resting a manicured hand on the cold steel table inside the vault of First National Bank. She looked at me with a mixture of practiced pity and impatient annoyance. We've already audited your personal checking accounts, your trading portfolio, and the workshop deed. You have nothing left. You're completely broke. Continuing this farce is just embarrassing for both of us. I stood beside her in my faded canvas jacket, holding the small brass key in my right hand. At 67 years old, I was a retired master watchmaker and precision instrument craftsman. For 40 years, I had spent 12 hours behind a magnifying eyepiece, working with gears no larger than a grain of sand, carefully building a fortune that allowed my family to live in quiet luxury. My hands were stained with motor oil and fine polishing paste. My hair was silver, but my eyes were as sharp as the day I calibrated my first grandfather clock. Beside Evelyn stood her husband, Greg, holding a thick leather accordion binder containing what he claimed was my full estate liquidation plan. Greg didn't look at me. He kept checking his platinum wristwatch, shifting his weight impatiently on the polished marble floor. "Evelyn is right, Thomas," Greg chimed in, his voice dry and authoritative. "The court hearing for the full estate conservatorship is tomorrow morning. We've already accounted for every dollar from the sale of your downtown workshop and your home equity. This deposit box has been sitting here untouched since 2012. It's just old receipts and junk. Let's sign the surrender papers and get to the attorney's office." I looked at my daughter. She was wearing a trench coat I had bought her for her college graduation, carrying a handbag that cost more than my monthly pension. "If there's nothing inside, Evelyn," I said, quietly, keeping my voice calm and steady, "opening it won't hurt anyone. I want to see what's in box 408. The bank manager, an elderly man named Arthur, who had known me for 30 years, inserted his master key into the left side of the lock. I stepped forward, inserted my brass key into the right side, and turned it until a heavy metallic click echoed through the silent vault. Arthur slid the long, heavy steel box out from the wall and placed it onto the stainless steel viewing table. "I'll give you 3 privacy," Arthur said softly, giving my shoulder a subtle, sympathetic squeeze before stepping out of the vault and pulling the heavy door partially shut. Evelyn let out a sharp, irritated sigh, crossing her arms over her chest. "Dad, we're wasting time. The movers are coming to clean out your living room this afternoon. You're moving into the assisted care suite on Monday, whether you like it or not." I reached out, placed my thumb on the brass latch, and lifted the lid of the box. Evelyn leaned forward, a condescending smirk on her lips, ready to laugh at my empty delusion. But as the lid swung open, the room seemed to lose all sound. Evelyn's smile froze instantly. Her posture went rigid. The color drained from her cheeks so fast it looked as though she had been struck by a sudden physical blow. Her eyes widened into circles of total, unadulterated shock. Inside the box lay 3 distinct items: a thick, blue, leather-bound ledger stamped with a Golden State notary seal, a high-capacity encrypted hardware drive, and a stack of bearer certificates resting on top of an original 1996 land grant deed. Greg leaned over her shoulder, frowning in confusion. "What is that? Those aren't bank statements." Evelyn didn't speak. She couldn't. Her hand hovered over the open box, trembling violently, her fingers twitching as if she were looking at a ghost. "I said nothing left, Evelyn," I whispered softly into the cold silence of the vault. "You spent 6 months telling the courts, the doctors, and our neighbors that I was a penniless, senile old man who squandered my life's work. But you never asked why box 408 was locked under a 2-key trust. To understand how my own daughter ended up standing in a bank vault, frozen in sheer terror before the contents of a metal box, you have to understand the slow, deceptive path that brought us there. 8 months earlier, my life was quiet and predictable. After my wife Clara passed away 3 years prior, I lived alone in the comfortable brick craftsman home I had built in 1988. I still spent my mornings in my backyard workshop, restoring antique clocks and precision nautical instruments for collectors around the country. I was financially secure, mentally sharp, and content with a simple life. Then, Evelyn and Greg began visiting every single weekend. At first, their visits seemed like an act of deep, devoted filial love. Evelyn would bring homemade soups, organize my kitchen cupboards, and insist on taking over my utility bill payments so I wouldn't have to worry about deadlines. Greg, who worked as a mid-level manager at a regional private equity firm, offered to look over my investment portfolios to optimize my yield. "You've worked your whole life, Dad," Evelyn would say, sitting across from me at the kitchen table, rubbing my calloused hand with soft affection. "Mom would have wanted you to slow down. Let Greg and me handle the heavy lifting. You just focus on your clocks." I loved my daughter. She was my only child. When Clara died, Evelyn was the thread that connected me to the happiest years of my life. When she smiled at me, I saw her mother's eyes. So, despite my natural instincts as a meticulous craftsman who double-checked every gear, I let down my guard. I gave Greg access to my personal accounting files. I let Evelyn organize my mail. The first subtle red flag appeared 4 months ago. I went to the local hardware store to pick up specialized brass screws and polishing oil. When I handed my debit card to the cashier, a young man named Toby, whose father I had known for 20 years, the machine beeped sharply, displaying a bright red rejection screen. "That's odd, Mr. Miller," Toby said, frowning as he tried it again. "It says account restricted. Contact primary administrator." "Primary administrator?" I repeated. A sudden chill touched the back of my neck. "It's a personal checking account. I'm the only person on it." I went straight home and called the bank. The customer service representative informed me that a power of attorney directive had been registered on my primary checking and savings accounts 2 weeks prior, adding Evelyn as the master manager. My personal daily withdrawal limit was capped at $50. I immediately called Evelyn. My heart was pounding, but I kept my tone mild. "Evelyn, sweetie, there seems to be a mistake at the bank. My card was declined today." "Oh, Dad," Evelyn answered, her voice dripping with warm motherly reassurance. "Greg and I noticed some suspicious online charges on your account last month. We added me as a secondary manager just to protect you from fraud. It's for your own safety, Dad. You know how clever these internet scammers are nowadays." "I don't shop online," I said quietly, "and I wasn't notified about a power of attorney." "We filed the paperwork through Greg's company lawyer, Dad. Don't stress your head with banking protocols. If you need cash for groceries or tools, just text me and I'll transfer it right over. We're just taking care of you." I sat at my oak desk for a long time after hanging up. A hollow, aching doubt began to settle in my chest. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to think my daughter was protecting my aging father. But my training as an instrument maker told me that when two gears don't mesh smoothly, something behind the faceplate is forcing them out of alignment. 2 weeks later, the situation escalated dramatically. I came home from an afternoon walk to find a large luxury SUV parked in my driveway. Inside my house, a sleek, well-dressed man in a tailored gray suit was walking through my living room, taking photographs of my oak furniture, my antique clock collection, and the hardwood floors. Evelyn was standing near the fireplace, holding a clipboard. "What is going on here, Evelyn?" I asked, stepping into the hallway and closing the front door behind me. The man in the suit paused, looking uncomfortable. Evelyn quickly stepped forward, putting on a bright, cheerful smile that felt entirely manufactured. "Dad, you're back early," she said smoothly. "This is Mr. Vance. He's an estate appraiser." "An appraiser?" I looked around my home, the home where Clara and I had painted the walls, where we had hung framed pictures of Evelyn's first steps, where every doorframe bore tiny pencil marks tracking my daughter's growth year by year. Why is an appraiser in my house? "Dad, we need to be realistic," Evelyn said, her voice dropping into a practiced, soothing register. "Maintaining a 3-bedroom house is too much for you. The roof needs repairs, the taxes are rising, and you're getting older. Greg found a buyer who wants to purchase the land. We're listing the house next month." Listing the house? My voice trembled slightly, though I fought to keep it steady. "Evelyn, this is my home. I built it. I paid off the mortgage 20 years ago. I am not selling it." Evelyn's cheerful facade vanished instantly, replaced by a cold, sharp impatience I had never seen in her before. "Dad, you don't have a choice," she snapped, stepping closer and lowering her voice so the appraiser wouldn't hear. "You're 67 years old. You leave the stove on, you forget your banking codes, and you spend all day tinkering with old junk in the shed. Greg and I are drowning in management costs, trying to keep your life afloat. We need to liquidate this property to secure your long-term care facility fees." I stared at her, feeling as though the room had suddenly lost all oxygen. "I leave the stove on? I have never left the stove on in my life, Evelyn." "The medical evaluation says otherwise, Dad," she said coldly, pulling a paper from her clipboard. "Dr. Thorne signed a preliminary assessment of cognitive impairment last week based on the home care reports Greg submitted." Dr. Thorne was Greg's personal family physician, a man I had met exactly once for a 15-minute physical exam. They were systematically building a legal trap around me. They were using my age, my quiet lifestyle, and my deep trust in my only child to paint me as an incompetent, senile old man who couldn't be trusted with his own life. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my dark workshop, watching the rhythmic back-and-forth swing of a brass pendulum on my workbench. The heartbreak was a physical weight in my chest, heavy and suffocating. My own daughter, the girl I had held in my arms when she was born, the girl whose college tuition I had paid in full without a single debt, looked at me and saw nothing more than a home equity check waiting to be cashed. The next morning, I made a quiet decision. I called my old friend Marcus, a retired forensic accountant and independent private investigator who had worked for the county sheriff's department for 30 years. Marcus was a man of few words, honest to a fault, and indebted to me ever since I had repaired his great-grandfather's pocket watch for free. An hour later, Marcus sat in my workshop, drinking dark coffee from a tin mug, while I laid out everything that had happened. "Arthur," Marcus said, his deep voice gravely as he looked over the bank restriction notices and the appraisal sheet. "They aren't doing this to put you in a nice retirement home. A preliminary cognitive hold doesn't happen overnight unless someone is paying expedited legal fees." "Why the rush, Marcus?" I asked softly, looking down at my hands. "Greg makes a good salary. Evelyn has her own income. Why do they need my home so badly?" Marcus pulled a manila folder from his leather briefcase. "I did a preliminary search on Greg's firm yesterday after you called me, Arthur. Greg isn't a high-flying partner, Arthur. He's a middle-tier director who made a catastrophic margin trade 6 months ago on an offshore energy fund. He lost $1.4 million of client money." The world seemed to stop moving. $1.4 million? His firm hasn't reported it to the regulatory board yet because Greg promised he would settle the capital deficit by the end of this quarter. If he doesn't produce that cash by Friday, he's facing federal wire fraud charges and a permanent prison sentence. Greg and Evelyn need your home, your workshop, and your entire cash estate to cover his illegal debt before the state authorities step in. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place with horrifying precision. They didn't think I was senile. They didn't think I was weak. They were desperate. They were willing to lock me away in a sterile assisted living facility, strip away my home, my dignity, and my freedom just to save Greg from going to federal prison. "What do you want to do, Arthur?" Marcus asked quietly. "We can file an emergency police report for elder exploitation today." I looked out the workshop window at the garden Clara had planted 30 years ago. No, I said, a deep, icy calm settling over my mind. If we file a report now, Greg's high-priced corporate lawyers will tie this up in civil court for years while they keep my accounts frozen. I want them to proceed. I want them to think they've won. Arthur? Marcus warned, frowning. They're filing for the final emergency conservatorship hearing tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. If the judge signs that order, Evelyn gets total legal control over every asset linked to your name. Let them file it, I said quietly, reaching into my desk drawer and pulling out a small brass key. They think they know every asset linked to my name, but they forgot one thing. Over the next 3 days, I played the part of the broken, defeated father. When Evelyn came over to oversee the movers packing up my kitchen, I sat in my old armchair, looking down at my lap, keeping my voice quiet and weak. "Is this the right thing, Evelyn?" I asked softly, letting my voice tremble just enough to sound fragile. "What about my workshop tools? My father gave me those lathes." "They're being auctioned off as estate clutter, Dad," Evelyn said indifferently, not even looking up at her phone as she texted her real estate agent. "You won't have room for a workbench in the facility. Just sign the surrender authorization form for the bank accounts so Greg can consolidate the funds before the hearing." "I'll sign whatever you want, Evelyn," I said quietly. "But before I go into that facility, I need to open my safe deposit box at First National. Your mother left some personal letters in there. I want to read them one last time." Evelyn stopped typing, her eyes flashing with a sudden, sharp interest. "A safe deposit box? You never mentioned a deposit box." "It's just old personal papers, sweetie." I put on a faint, confused frown. "Box 408. I haven't opened it in 12 years. I think there's a few old family photos inside." Evelyn looked at Greg, who was standing in the doorway. I saw the quick, greedy spark in Greg's eyes. He assumed there might be cash, unregistered bearer bonds, or jewelry hidden away. Something else he could instantly liquidate to meet his Friday deadline. "Fine," Evelyn said smoothly, her tone softening back into fake kindness. "We'll take you to the bank tomorrow morning right before the court hearing. We'll open box 408 together." That brings us back to the cold, silent vault inside First National. Evelyn was frozen in place, staring into the open metal box as if looking down an open abyss. Greg was frowning, leaning over her shoulder, pointing to the thick blue leather ledger stamped with the Golden State seal. "Evelyn, what is that?" Greg asked, his voice laced with sudden, nervous tension. "What does it mean, master holding trust?" I reached into the box, my calloused fingers moving with the precise, deliberate care of a master watchmaker. I lifted the blue leather ledger and opened it to the first page. "In 1996, I began, my voice calm, clear, and ringing through the steel vault. When your mother and I built our home and expanded my precision instrument business, we knew that life was unpredictable. We wanted to ensure that our legacy, everything we built, would be protected from predatory debt, bad investments, and outside interference." Evelyn swallowed hard, her throat dry, her eyes fixed on the notary seal. "Dad, what did you do?" "I didn't own the house, Evelyn," I explained softly, looking her dead in the eye. "And I haven't owned the workshop or my primary investment accounts since 1998. Everything, the land, the physical home, the workshop equipment, and the main capital portfolio was permanently transferred into the Clara Miller Irrevocable Family Trust." Greg's face turned ash white. "Irrevocable? But your name is on the county property tax bills." "I am the designated lifetime beneficiary, Greg," I corrected him calmly. "I have the sole right to occupy the home, use the funds, and live off the interest until the day I die. But I do not hold individual title ownership, which means my individual signature cannot sell the property, a power of attorney cannot liquidate it, and a court conservatorship cannot touch a single cent of it." "No, no, no!" Greg shouted, his professional composure shattering into pure panic.
He grabbed the binder from under his arm and began flipping through papers frantically. "That's impossible. We pulled the county land registry. The primary deed was registered under your name." "You pulled the residential land grant from 1988, Greg," I said softly, reaching into box 408 and lifting the second document, the encrypted hardware drive and the certified state registry filing. "You were so greedy, so rushed to steal my life's work to cover your federal fraud, that you never hired a real title abstractor to check the secondary covenant archives." Evelyn turned to her husband, her voice rising into a sharp, terrified shriek. "Greg, what is he talking about? What does this mean?"
"It means," I said, placing the blue ledger flat on the steel table, "that the property you listed for sale last week doesn't belong to me, and it certainly doesn't belong to you." "Who owns it then?" Evelyn screamed, tears of rage and panic springing to her eyes. I opened the ledger to the final clause, pointing to the bold black lettering at the bottom of the page. "Under the terms of the 1998 Trust Covenant," I stated, my voice echoing off the cold steel walls, "if any child or heir attempts to forcibly remove the lifetime beneficiary, file fraudulent medical petitions, or illegally liquidate trust assets for personal gain, their secondary heirship is instantly and permanently revoked." I looked at my daughter, feeling a deep, quiet sorrow that no legal victory could ever heal. As of 8 o'clock this morning, when my attorney filed this certified trust ledger with the state probate court, full legal ownership of my entire estate transferred permanently to the St. Jude Children's Research Hospital Foundation. The house, the workshop, and the investment capital are completely out of your reach forever. Greg dropped his leather binder. The papers scattered across the marble floor of the vault, but he didn't even bend down to pick them up. He stared at me with wide, hollow eyes, realizing in one terrifying second that his last hope of raising $1.4 million had evaporated into thin air. You destroyed us," Greg whispered, his knees trembling. "My firm. The federal auditors are coming on Friday. I'm going to prison." "You destroyed yourself, Greg," I said quietly. "You broke the law, and then you tried to make an innocent father pay the price for your crime." Evelyn fell to her knees on the cold vault floor, grabbing the hem of my worn canvas jacket, sobbing hysterically. "Dad, please," she wept, looking up at me with desperate, terrified eyes. "I'm your daughter. I'm your little girl. You can't do this to us. Talk to your lawyer. Undo the trust. We'll fix Greg's debt together. Please, Dad, don't leave me with nothing." I looked down at my daughter. I remembered holding her hand on her first day of school. I remembered teaching her how to ride a bicycle down the driveway of the house she had tried to sell out from under me. "I gave you everything I had, Evelyn," I said, my voice thick with emotion, a single tear slipping down my cheek. "I gave you a home, an education, and a father who loved you more than life itself. But you didn't want my love. You wanted my collapse." I reached down, gently unclasped her fingers from my jacket, and stepped back. Arthur, the bank manager, stepped into the vault, accompanied by 2 uniformed officers from the county sheriff's department and my attorney, Frank. "Evelyn Miller, Gregory Vance," Frank announced firmly, holding up an official court summons. "You are hereby served with an immediate injunction for elder financial exploitation, filing false medical affidavits, and attempted real estate fraud. The county prosecutor's office has already been notified regarding the unauthorized account restrictions." Greg didn't say a word. He stood there like a stone statue as the officers escorted him out of the vault. Evelyn continued to weep on the floor, her hands covering her face, her pathetic cries echoing down the long, sterile corridors of the bank. I turned away, walked out of the vault,
and stepped through the heavy glass doors of the bank into the bright, crisp morning air. An hour later, I took a taxi back to my brick craftsman home. The mover's truck that Evelyn had hired was parked near the curb. I walked over to the driver, handed him a $50 bill, and told him his services were no longer required. He nodded, backed the truck out of the driveway, and drove away. I walked up the stone front steps, unlocked the heavy oak door, and stepped inside. The house was completely quiet. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass window in the entryway, casting warm patterns of red and gold across the polished hardwood floors. I walked through the quiet hallway into my backyard workshop. I took off my jacket, hung it on the wooden peg behind the door, and put on my leather work apron. I sat down on my tall wooden stool at my workbench, pulled the brass magnifying eyepiece down over my eye, and picked up a delicate 100-year-old pocket watch that had stopped ticking months ago. Using my fine tweezers, I carefully adjusted the balance wheel, set the tiny ruby jewel back into its socket, and wound the main spring. Tick, 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 tick. The steady, perfect rhythm filled the quiet room. I placed the watch down on my velvet pad, sat back in my chair, and looked out the window at the garden Clara had planted so many years ago. My home was safe, my legacy was protected, destined to help sick children long after I was gone. Justice had been served, and the truth had been revealed in all its cold, undeniable clarity. But as I sat alone in the peaceful workshop, listening to the quiet ticking of the clock, I looked at a small framed photograph on my workbench, a picture of 7-year-old Evelyn sitting on my shoulders, laughing in the summer sun. I picked up the frame, held it in my calloused hands, and let the quiet tears fall in the silence of my home. I had saved my legacy, but as I looked at the smiling face of the little girl I had raised, I realized that the hardest part of growing old isn't losing what you've built. It's realizing that the people you loved most in this world completely forgot what love truly meant.